It's fall. Cold season, flu season is starting, and apparently people are still going to work despite being sick. This and more in the new channel update. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to the channel update October. We discussed interesting topics in the last few weeks, starting with a video about the availability bias, a new addition to our series on biases and fallacies, and quite an interesting one because the availability bias is a very important and fundamental bias. Very briefly summarized, it means that we believe something to be common and probable if we can easily come up with examples. And I find the mechanism behind it very interesting because what our brain does is basically answering a simple question instead of a difficult one. For example, we might be faced with the question if the risk of dying in an accident is very high and we just don't know. But our brain just says, oh well, I don't know, but I can just check if I can easily come up with examples for severe accidents, and probably some gruesome pictures from the media will come to mind, and then our brain says, oh well, it seems to be a high probability, a high risk. And this is quite interesting. We will later encounter other biases and fallacies that rely on a similar mechanism where our brains also answer easier questions. After that, we had a look at some nudge units, a small addition to our book review of The Book Nudge by Tyler and Sunstein. A nudge, briefly summarized, is a tiny push in the right direction, a tiny influence on our decision making to lead us in a positive direction. And several governments have decided to use this knowledge, this approach, and have established nudge units. And we had a look at some of them, at some countries that have them. One aspect I pretty much excluded in this video were moral considerations, such as, is it okay to use nudges and to influence people in this way? And is this specific nudge unit doing good work that is morally all right, or do they have questionable projects? The latter question I just can't answer because obviously I don't have the resources to go through all the projects of even a single nudge unit because they have plenty over several years, and this is just too much work for this one person, so I can't really answer that. The examples I dug up and I presented in the video, those were quite reasonable for me. For example, getting people to get vaccinated against the measles makes sense to me, or fighting against germs that are resistant to antibiotics also makes sense. And I can understand why the state wants people to pay their taxes on time. So the examples I presented are all right for me, but of course I don't know the entire work of all those nudge units in detail. As for the general question whether nudges are all right or not, I guess this is quite debatable. In my book, they are okay. I pretty much agree with with Tyler and Sunstein. They basically said every decision we make is made under some boundary conditions, and those conditions will always influence the decision. So it's not an option to not influence any decisions, but we can just try to influence them in a positive way. And I think it makes sense for governments to implement that, to try to do that. An example that is somewhat related, I recently encountered when watching YouTube myself. There was an ad that came up repeatedly that we really disliked because we had to watch it so often. And this was an ad for a company that offered loans. And this is something that I don't find very agreeable, because I can't come up with any scenario where a loan for consumerism, for just buying stuff you like, where such a loan is anything that makes sense or that is a good idea. Basically, it's always a bad idea and an unnecessary risk. And so it's not an ad I have positive feelings about, and I always have to consider in such a situation that ads are also displayed in during and in front of and after my own videos. I don't earn any money there because my channel is still too small, but ads are displayed nonetheless, so my viewers might have to watch this ad for the loan company. And yeah, this is a bit not very nice. And in Germany, advertising for alcohol and for cigarettes, that is greatly restricted to protect minors, to protect children and youth. And I think this is a good idea. This makes sense. And of course, this isn't a nudge in the strict sense, but it is a scenario where the government influences the way we make our decisions and puts restrictions on this decision process. And it's a case where I think it makes total sense. So but I don't reject nudges in principle. I think it can be a good thing. After that, we discussed the phenomenon of flow. The phenomenon where we are really engaged in an activity, really get into it, are absorbed in it, and don't notice our surroundings anymore. Quite an interesting topic. Something that where information is still a bit lacking from my point of view is the question, what the conditions, which conditions are required for us to be able to have flow experiences at our work, at our workplace. Now, this was covered a bit. There was a chapter about flow at work in Csikszentmihalyi's book, and he also had this inner and outer factors, internal and external factors, but he pretty much focused on our mindset, on developing the right attitude that will help us have more flow experiences, and the information about the external conditions were more general, not that specific, not specific for work. And I hope in the future we might find some more information about that. Unfortunately, Csikszentmihalyi himself has died in 2021, but there are of course other scientists who deal with the topic, and there will probably be new findings, new information about it in the future. And finally, of course, there was a book review. This time I presented to you Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. This was an addition to the video about the method we had earlier. And I'm quite curious to see how you like that video, if you think this video makes sense. Please feel free to also let me know in the comments. Do you think it is a good thing to have this video in addition to the other one? And did you like it? Or do you think it was unnecessary and there were too much overlap, too much redundancy between this video and the earlier one? It's a difficult question for myself, a case I sometimes encounter. In this case, I thought it does make sense to have the book review, because not all aspects, not all topics from the book were covered in the general video, and I also wanted to talk about the structure of the book and the topics, so it made sense for me here. And in any case, it's a very good book about a good method. And I guess it's nice in the area of communication to discuss the topic apart from Schulz von Thun's method for a change. Of course, they are great and people like them a lot, but it's nice to have some variety after all. Which topics are to come in the next few weeks? Allow me to start with the week after the next. In this week, we will discuss the Riemann-Thomann model, an interesting model that is part of Schulz von Thun's toolbox. As Schulz von Thun phrases it, it deals with the cardinal points of the soul, with closeness, distance, with continuity and change. And about those four aspects, Christoph Thomann has developed an interesting model based on an earlier book by Fritz Riemann, and we will have a look at it, find out what we can do with it. It is quite a versatile model. Now, among other things, one can use it as a base for a personality typology. And this is where things get a bit difficult, and for this reason we will next week have a look at personality typologies in general. The basic idea here is that the world is full of different people, great variety, they all have different personalities, but maybe the chaos isn't that great. Maybe all those people we encounter are just 4 or 8 or 16 different types after all. Now, the basic idea is a bit questionable. The methods that are popular and widely used are often a bit questionable as well, and the personality tests that are used to figure out which personality type I am, or which personality type the job applicant or the employee is, all of those are also, most of those are also quite problematic. So we will have a look at that. In the video, I will present to you the most common, well-known personality typologies and the problems that surround them. And this will be a good base for discussing the Riemann-Thomann model in the week after, because you will better understand why some areas we can get into are a bit problematic. And finally, in the third week from now, we will of course have another book review, and this time I will present to you the Mind Map book by Tony Buzan, by the person who invented mind maps. And I think this is very interesting because mind maps are a very useful, very versatile tool. I frequently work with them, find them quite useful. I think it's also fun to use them, but we haven't discussed them on this channel yet. So this will be a nice introduction to the topic. We will start at the very beginning with the inventor of the mind maps. By the way, the next few videos will also be a bit more elaborate than my default. Will have a few pictures, few depictions. I had some earlier, but not very frequently. So here we have 3 videos that will all have them. It just turned out this way by chance, but of course it's nice to have that for a change. Near the end of last year, we had a video on this channel that was called Working While Sick, and it discussed the phenomenon of people going to work despite being sick. This is, of course, a common phenomenon. You have probably encountered it in your surroundings, with your colleagues, and so on. But it is, of course, a highly problematic behavior. The people who do that cause a lot of damage. First of all, of course, to themselves, but also economic damage. Because first of all, people who go to work despite being sick end up having more days of sick leave, of absence, than people who stay at home right from the beginning. And furthermore, of course, if you are sick while you are working, you are prone to making more mistakes that will cause follow-up costs. In the best case, it will just be costs to correct the mistake. In the worst case, there pretty much is no limit. And of course, you will also infect your colleagues, so the whole problem will multiply. At the end of this video, I mentioned my hope that this problem will get better, that going to work while sick will cease to be a common phenomenon due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that being at work despite being sick will be viewed more critical, that the culture surrounding that will change. Now, in Germany, there is a new recent study from the Pronova BKK, which is a public health insurance agency, and it is quite recent, from September 2022. And it was an online survey, which isn't optimal. It also had only about 1,200 participants, so it's not a very great and reliable study, but I guess the general direction is still somewhat representative. And this study once again showed that only a minority of employees will really stay at home if they are sick. Only 28% of people will really do that consequently. And every 10th participant said that they will even go to work if they have a positive COVID-19 test, which is of course extra sinister and very, very problematic. So, at least in Germany, the situation has unfortunately not improved yet. What we need for that, from my point of view, are 2 things. First of all, we need awareness. Because most of the people who go to work despite being sick probably don't say, well, I hate my company and want to do as much damage as possible, and my co-workers I hate as well, so they're bad luck. No, they probably think they are doing something good. And that even showed in that study. A lot of people said they weigh how sick they are against how much work there currently is at work, which is of course not a good approach. approach. So they believe they are doing something good and positive, and it is important that everybody understands that this really is behavior that hurts everyone and just causes damage for everyone. And the second thing we need is superiors, people in leadership positions who help to improve the situation, who deal with the phenomenon in a good way. First of all, superiors who set a positive example, who are good role models by staying at home themselves when they are sick and not coming to work despite being sick. And furthermore, who also, if their employees come to work and they are clearly sick, who just send them home and do not praise them or view this behavior in a positive light. Because I believe company culture is quite an important factor here. I briefly mentioned the phenomenon in the soft skill talk about apparent productivity. I will link to the videos I mentioned in the video description. So I believe changing company culture is quite an important step here. Probably a lot of people who go to work sick know that they are making a bad mistake and that they shouldn't do it, but they know that due to the company culture, it will be to their disadvantage to stay at home, or that they will gain a lot of that will be viewed in a very positive way if they still come to work, and that it will get them bonus points at their superior, something like that. Now, finally, you might wonder why people get sick in fall and winter, why we always have cold season and flu season there. Now, the apparent reason seems to be the weather. The word cold is even the word cold and the weather cold even is the same word, basically. But this is actually a common misconception. There are two main reasons why we get sick in fall and winter. The first one is that the dry air produced by heating will dry out our the membranes in our noses and so on, which protect us from germs. And if they dry out, it will not work very well anymore. And this is one of the main reasons. We also discussed this in the video about indoor climate. And the second big reason is that in fall and winter, due to the weather, indoor spaces are more crowded. More people crowd together in smaller spaces. Now, obviously, there isn't a lot we can do against that. Employers can do something, for example, by allowing for home office, for working from home. However, if, for example, you go to work by train, you just have to deal with the fact that it will be more crowded, more full in fall and winter. Anyway, I hope that you stay healthy and get fine through the cold season and flu season. We will see each other again next week. For today, I take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.